Well, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Perhaps you're joining us from, I don't know, I think last time we had some people from Swaziland and, you know, our massive audience around the world. Of course, I'm time traveling here to the future when there is such a thing, and luckily this is recorded live. Welcome to the High Octane Friends podcast. We have really exciting guests here today who actually know stuff. So,
as opposed to the two of us, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Trevor, because you know a thing or two. But you know, I will denigrate myself a little bit. Bryan Watson, who is sort of, is it fair to say, Bryan, you're sort of a fixture on the tech and investment scene in Canada and beyond. How do you want to bill yourself?
I've been around a little too long. I don't know. I mean, as I say, yeah, a couple decades in the ecosystem, agitating and the like. So yeah, no. History on the angel side, startup drinks, tax credits, policy, shit disturbing. I don't know if we can swear, but I'm doing it. There we go.
we sprinkle in just hopefully just one or two, and then so long as we don't get flagged on YouTube, we're good.
Yeah, you know, I think Google may have you know, on the translation side of it, like if you say someone is a bugger over here, it translates in England to something horrible, like, you know, the way they use the C word too much.
Yes.
So yeah. So anyway, you can talk in Canadian.
Very good. Yeah. So as I say, just been around in the ecosystem for last 20 years. I can go through history if you want, but
well, what are the highlights? What are you most impressed about Bryan Watson yourself?
I have no idea. But you know, in terms of you know, things that we've done over the last little while, couple decades. I mean, I came back to Canada, was living in Scotland and helping with the angel ecosystem there a little bit as their angel and entrepreneurial ecosystem, and living out there, and you know, came back and there really wasn't an angel ecosystem. There was one group that was in the process of, you know, dying for various different reasons, not really any fault of their own. And then, you know, a handful across Canada, sort of loosely organized, and ended up taking over and getting vocal about it. So somebody said, fix it. And ended up taking over the National Angel Capital Organization, setting up the angel groups in Ontario mostly, or primarily, and then we helped with a number of the other ones with the National Angel Capital Organization. Left that in 2012, did a bunch of work. You know, we started Clean Tech North in 2008. I took it over in 2012. Was a partner at a shred firm during that time as well. So, you know, helping, you know, 200 companies a year file their shred, which was really a good, honestly, it wasn't about the shred. The shred was something companies needed to do anyway, but shred's really good due diligence. So you get to know who you are, what do you do, technology at a very granular level, and your technological uncertainties at a granular level, but also how we're organized as a company. When we say, you know, send us your chart of accounts with your general ledger and, you know, all your segmented expenses for shred versus not, and they kind of go, what's our chart of accounts? What's a general ledger? That to me says maybe it's not quite prime time to take you to an angel investor. Maybe there's some stuff you need to get done. So to me, shred was always a means of due diligence to be able to connect dots and add value. You know, continued that when I moved over to Venbridge a few years back, which financed and then easily, which financed the shred receivable as companies accrued that throughout the year or after the fiscal year, but often during the fiscal year. Because cash starts to get you know, rather tight over the last few years. Lots of reasons. You know, I moved over. It was just before Silicon Valley Bank tanked, so that was, you know, big exogenous shock number one. Then we sat on our own hand grenade and introduced capital gains taxation that was, you know, threatened to obliterate the angel community, and we still are recovering from that, I would say, and the shock of, okay, well, you know, maybe I don't want to invest in this high risk stuff if I'm not going to get the return, or if that's just going to be, summarily, taken away from me in taxation. And then we had the last year and a half of economic upheaval, rupture. You pick your word. And so shock to shock to shock, all of which hitting equity markets. And so I'd moved over to Easley and Venbridge partially to help finance the shred, because one big asset that if you can finance that and ease cash flow pressures, whether it's supply chain management cash flow, because you now got to pay your producers of your good in whatever country 100% 90 days before they deliver, or you've got to manage cash flow a little bit more elasticity of your cash flow to meet payroll. Either way, there's that big asset there that companies are accruing if they've got innovation that can be factored or financed. And then the other reason I moved over was on the clean tech side, because I was involved in both the shred policy with the new budget. We could talk about that if you want, but also all the clean economy tax credits. So Clean Tech North was involved in a lot of that work, and helped get those passed. Still CPA Canada working group chair or co-chair on those tax credits. And ideally, would like to finance some of those in the next little bit. So been sort of at that juncture between different states of capital, types of capital for 20 years. I was involved in helping take a company public in the gaming space too. So lots of different things along the way.
Amazing. So one of the things I'd like us to touch on today is just, as Trevor has cautioned me before you got on today, it's like, let's be positive.
Fair.
I think.
Challenging, fair.
Yeah. But, amidst all those challenges and, you're talking about shred, so our American and other international listeners may not be familiar. It's essentially a tax credit funding, non-dilutive funding, which is really, really advantageous for Canadian entrepreneurs. But my goat was gotten to be grammatically correct recently amid the kerfuffle of Y Combinator mentioning that they were going to stop funding Canadian corporate companies, which they had to pull back from, and it just highlighted for me a couple of things, and that is the romance of going to the U.S. too early. Like, we would all agree, international expansion is good. You want to be able to sell into America and other markets, notwithstanding what may be going on with whatever government at whatever time. There's always something to like or dislike. But ultimately, we want to be able to sell into and serve customers in those markets. But Canadian entrepreneurs and founders, especially the really young ones or really early ones, to kind of automatically be romanced by the idea of going, say, to Silicon Valley without being, at all aware of the downsides in addition to all the positives. The reality is that, for the most part, unless you've got something really right off the bat, obviously world-beating technology-wise, you are going to be entering the most competitive market on earth, or certainly seen that way. And they don't have the same funding, like government funding grants like SR&ED. Their R&D tax credits are not generous like Canada's. And yes, there are lots of angels, and yes, of course, all the famous VC firms in the Valley. But that's you're competing for that money with a bunch of other people. And what bothers me is like things that I heard recently. I was at an event. I won't name who the organizer was, but you can probably guess because it was a big event. And they get people who've had these successes, but they may have been some years earlier. You alluded to, Bryan, how until a few years ago the money was flowing more, like venture capital, for example, and it's kind of dried up in the last few years relatively. Very true. But they tried out these people who raised pre-2021. Yep. And talking about their success and the small samples and how easy it is, and hey, I got funded in 9 hours, and VC there, and Americans are always this, or whoever, English or Japanese, are always this. Just as a quick aside, like, I lived in Tokyo for 5 years, and the hackneyed, overused saw about Japanese is it's so hard to do business there. And so I had a couple of businesses. Still to this day, it's one of them was the most successful financially that I've ever experienced. But before doing that, it's like I couldn't tell you how many people said to me, you should not do a business here in Japan. It's too hard, culturally, and every other reason. Like, here it comes, folks. Fuck that. Because it's like, I thought that was a reason, and maybe it's that disruptive spirit. You, Bryan, apparently we were simpatical on that. I'm like, no, that's exactly the reason to do it. And so if you're just following the hordes going to Silicon Valley, maybe you want to open your eyes a little bit, and at least be informed by people like you.
Well, I mean, I think the thing, and it annoys me because it every once in a while it resurfaces. And you saw John Ruffalo speak about it. You know, it was, now I think it was 2012, might have been 2011. There was an actual barrier to getting, basically administrative barrier to getting your money out of companies in the past, such that, you know, basically I'm going to simplify, but everybody along the equity chain, whether it's angel investor, had to sign off on basically a declaration of their country of residence and where they should be taxed. There was a treaty saying you'll be taxed in your own jurisdiction, but you had to go all the way down the chain. Angels, that's kind of a one-to-one. I can call the angels and get that paper signed off. When you start going into venture funds, there could be a bunch of LPs. There could be a bunch of funds of funds in a fund. And so it goes all the way down, and you need to get that off. Now, if you've taken a company public or, you know, other exits, you know, there could be a big change in the value of that company in the 6 to 8 month timeline that it takes to get all those signatures, depending on your sources of capital, so that people can get taxed. Because everybody, you know, most people are escrowed in that situation and they can't sell their shares. So if you're trapped in that investment, something happens, some big exogenous shock, and the value is obliterated, well, that's a bad thing. So when it is purely an administrative barrier, it was called Section 116. That's kind of silly. And so that was, you know, the argument. You know, a little more sophisticated than that's kind of silly, but basically that was the argument. And so we ended up getting that Section 116 changed. At that time, that's when you started to see some of these big inflows of Canadian companies getting the $50 million, $25 million, you know, rounds coming in, unfettered, undelawared, and the money actually coming north, because the understanding was, okay, the issue of why I was making you turn to a Delaware co. isn't necessarily an issue. There can be other issues for sure, but, you know, that big issue of how do I get my money out on exit went away. That was 2012, and we're still talking about it and educating people on it.
That's the thing. These kinds of things tend to stick around in the minds of many people.
Yes. Well, and you got, and so to me, it felt like somebody missed a decade of history and said something, to somebody. I'm sure there's been lots of conversations about this, but it seemed like there was a misunderstanding in there. I don't know if there was any intentionality in it whatsoever. I'm just not close enough to it. But you know, it seems like somebody missed a decade of history lessons that, you know, this wasn't necessary anymore, and had raised a bunch of money in the past, and that was the structure, because it kind of had to be for a while. But that hasn't been the case for a long time. And I think, you know, I wasn't involved in any of the conversations that resulted in the Canada being re-added in there. But I suspect what happened is that was kind of pointed out and kind of went, is this law of unintended consequences or a misunderstanding or not? And it seems like it might have been that. I don't know. But
yeah, because I guess the important thing here is that if they had persisted in that, right, where they weren't going to invest in Canadian incorporated companies anymore, what they give up, like all the early stage founders and all the talent we have around, say, you know, the Toronto Waterloo corridor, for example, and other parts of Canada, Montreal included, and all the talent that we have here, we have tons.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think this is, in many ways, there was a company recently I heard, it was Devin Galloway, who I believe is the CTO of Vidya, and that's kind of a Canadian unicorn. Now they're all over the world.
Yep.
You know, some Waterloo guys, and you know, they started this firm, and I think he was saying that what's his name, Graham, the original guy at Y Combinator, was saying
Hmm.
And he just showed up and he's like, you know, the biggest problem, biggest challenge you're going to have ultimately in succeeding in your business, and just talking with a group of the founders, was talent. And so they thought, yeah, here we are in the Valley. At that time, they'd gone through Y Combinator. And they're like, oh, we can solve that problem because we can go to Waterloo, and you're surrounded by tech talent and other talent. And, you know, Canada has all of these, you know, not to, because I'm not a technical person in this sense, but I also went to University of Waterloo as an undergrad, and, you know, Trevor will.
Yes.
Yeah, we like to joke about MIT versus Harvard and all that, but I mean, I can honestly say, of all the people and all the experiences I've ever had with the University of Waterloo, we are definitely on par in terms of technical know-how. For computer science at University of Waterloo with MIT and Caltech and Stanford and all those. And so they were so smart to know that. I wish we had more kind of, you know, famously known companies. Maybe you can add into that a little, Brian. I don't know. You know, somebody that you're willing to mention. I don't know.
I mean, famously known companies in the Canadian ecosystem that built here, sold here. I mean, we've had them. You know, they tend to get bought because they tend to plateau. So, I mean, I think of it wasn't Genum. Genum was a hearing aid company. They did get bought as well, but there was a water filtration. Xenon was bought by GE. You know, I mean, there's lots of companies that hit that ceiling. There's not as many that break through that ceiling to the Shopify level, to the BlackBerry level of old, you know, and we have had the Nortels, but the fact that we're still pulling on Nortel, however many years later, is telling. We do have a lot of great companies, no question, and I think we're seeing the reemergence of some of those now, as we aggressively look for Canadian options for lots of different geopolitical and financial reasons. I think we're starting to see those now, and I think you'll see some of those become the next Nortels because they, because we actually did what we should have been doing all along, is helping procure our own technology. At an earlier stage. It doesn't have to be, you know, Innovative Solutions Canada, you know, prototyping stage, but the number of stories, and then LinkedIn's rife with them, and you can, everybody's got one. My buddy built a company, couldn't sell in Canada, sold, every state, every country in the world, and there was a chap, and I remember the first time I heard this story, it was a chap named Wayne Prabhu. Quick Play Media, and this is probably 2003-4, and he said, I've sold to every telecom in the US, and I haven't managed to sell to one telecom in Canada. The day, I think it was, again, if I'm getting it wrong, don't quote me, Wayne, but I remember him saying, literally the day we were signing the paper to get acquired, he got a call from one of the bigger telcos. And it's like that pattern has repeated itself. I don't know how many times.
And why is that? Is that a like risk of, is that a typical sort of Canadian risk aversion thing?
There's part of that. If we think about government procurement itself, that there's definitely that at play. Where systems are built to, or qualifying criteria for RFPs are built such that you need a install base that is not possible for certain companies. I think part of it is literally historical. From the days of hewing the wood and sending it back, mercantilist, branch plant, we're used to sending the raw materials away and buying it back. So whether that raw material is intellectual property, whether that it's wood and buying the cabinets, I think there is a historic predilection towards doing that, and not even necessarily consciously, but in the procurement overall, I think that has seeped historically into the procurement practices at a lot of Canadian companies that, we just get the resources and we buy the products from somebody else. And I think what you're seeing now is a bit of a renaissance, and some stumbling steps towards, well, how do we actually do this? How do we change our procurement systems? I saw that change happening with some of the clean tech stuff that we do, and some folks that I know in the sort of clean procurement side of things. And procurement policy is hard to change. There's a process. So adding more green procurement in there, or clean as a filter for what you're going to procure, is hard. Adding Canada as a filter in there could be hard as well. So what is Canadianness? I mean, there's lots of discussion on that right now too. Pick a definition and run with it to a certain extent, but we've got a few of those definitions that we already use. So
it brings to mind what you're saying in procurement policies and changing procurement attitudes and incentives. It's something I read recently, and I can't recall where it was, but usually I'm pretty careful of the source, otherwise it doesn't go in here. And one example was France, how now they're about to kick off one of the ministries, like from Microsoft products, and so they've gone with this thing I've never heard of before, Libre. I guess it's like an open source kind of technology, which is French. And so the idea of sovereignty and protecting yourself. And rightly or wrongly, the current U.S. administration has, forced this issue. Maybe I want to see silver linings. Maybe it's good in the end. Maybe these are all good wake-up calls for Canada and our American friends too, of which I'm sure. Yeah, it is weird to me how the Western world at least, is so dominated by the likes of technology from Google and now OpenAI and Microsoft's. We have lots of technologies here. Can't we have? It shouldn't just be the lowest bid.
The freemium that gets you in because they got the capital to survive long enough, giving it away to
right.
But I'm very interested. So those are kind of big established companies and how we deal with them as Canadians. But how do you think fundamentally we can make it better for early stage founders and say pre-Series A? Before they, I do think it's natural that they're going to go looking for capital to do a serious round, like a Series A in Silicon Valley. Why wouldn't you? But before that, to get to that stage, what do you think are some of the fundamental things that we should change, and what you believe will change? Because there are some things coming up, I guess, in the new budget, right?
There are some changes to SR&ED. A lot of that will. You want to talk about those in a second. Fundamentally, I would say the biggest shift at the earliest stage that I think needs to be made is, and partially, I'm to blame for it, for the angel ecosystem. Partially, I have a love-hate relationship with things like the Dragon's Den or TechCrunch, where you're kind of going, oh. Yeah, so some of these things over the last decade and a half have positioned certain parts of the capital stack as this is what you do first. You go and you get angel money when you have the idea. It was always a fiction. It was never real. But there's this TechCrunch, Dragons. Then the first thing you do as an entrepreneur is go get somebody else's money and blow some of that, and then maybe put some of your own friends and family in, but maybe not. And the capital stack, the options that are out there, there's a lot more options out there than just that. And I think one of the disservices that we've adopted is thinking that that's our only path. Our only path is going to Silicon Valley and getting angel or venture money. Now, reality is, if you're going down there for angel, most of the angels would look at you and go, why isn't your local angel ecosystem investing in you? Venture would be slightly different. But certainly on the angel side, because it's more of a contact sport, so other people's private after-tax dollars, their question is often, well, if Uncle Joe hasn't invested in you, and the local angel group hasn't invested in you, I'm not flying up there for every board meeting in person. So we kind of want somebody on the ground, maybe co-investment later on, but really, angel isn't the right time to go down there necessarily. Though again, the accelerators kind of break that a little bit. But yeah, I think the biggest fundamental change I think you are seeing right now is people realizing that there is a broader capital stack out there. There's debt, which has its own implications. You might have a personal guarantee. You might not. You might be factoring your receivables. We've got great companies like Fund Through here in Canada. You can factor your SR&ED with easily. There's receivables financing. Well, that doesn't necessarily pop into people's brains as one of the first things that they can do. But that's just managing your own money as opposed to taking in somebody else's money. So it's a more nuanced approach that people, I think, need to take and are starting to realize that they have to take than just, I'm just going to go raise $1 million of somebody else's money if I blow it. Oh well. So
I often think in that regard too, whether it's ranging from an angel or from like a proper venture capital firm or something that, that may be really what you want, but you should go into it with your eyes open, because careful what you wish for. Because I've been in that situation before. I raised money and you deal with, you might get a good angel, you might get a terrible one.
Yep.
A set of them, and it's just like there are lots of strings attached to that sort of money. I think people are definitely afraid in many cases of debt, but it might be a better option. I mean,
and that's all I'd advocate for. I mean, believe me, I love my angels. I love the angel ecosystem. I believe me. I've spent way too much time in that ecosystem to not. I love the venture capital ecosystem, but knowing what logically fits together for your stage of company and what is most advantageous, and thinking purposefully through and planning through, not just kind of assuming that it's just going to be angel money or venture money, and then figuring out the rest of the plan. Do it purposely. Think through the implications of, I'm going to scale this, but I'm only going to raise this amount of equity because I can leverage that with some Fed dev money, or a loan, a non-transparent, non-convertible debt loan from Fed dev, and I can use that to do because we changed some legislation around the government assistance side to if it's a unconditionally repayable loan, that doesn't eat my SR&ED. So now I can recycle my SR&ED faster because I've got that loan, but I needed a little bit of angel money to get the loan. And that whole pile of cash, maybe $1 million, but instead of raising $1 million in equity at an early stage, giving up a lot of equity, you might have raised 250, leveraged that up, and recycled the SR&ED. So
I guess one of the important problems you can encounter if you raise equity too early is you kind of mess up your cap table for later.
Yes.
Like you've already given too much away. So what's the incentive for a big investor later on? And they want to make sure that you remain incentivized as founders, right? So, but if you give like, I don't know, 20% of your company for like $250,000 or something, like it's going to be hard for them to justify coming in later, right?
It can, and I hate talking in generalities because I've seen times when that actually made sense. And okay, let's do it. But thinking about it, being intentional is what I would advocate for more than anything else. Just really being intentional around how much you're raising, what does that get you? What milestones does that get you? Does it get you to a better valuation? Does it allow you to unlock a bunch of other financing that's non-dilutive?
Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned something earlier, and I kind of heard a little bit about this, but this is maybe we'll delve in a little to this. You mentioned using organizations like Fund Through, factor your SR&ED, your R&D tax credits, because of course the money doesn't otherwise come to you in the near term, right? So that's going to allow you to bring it forward. Because people might think, speed is of the essence when you're in the innovation economy and building that. And yes, you're absolutely right. So how can you make that money flow earlier? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, because so Fund Through does receivables financing, easily does SR&ED financing. In the end, both are types of receivables, but a lot of where a lot of companies die is actually cash flow, not actually, and so managing that cash flow, if you need to bring that forward, you've got a great big purchase order, but you need to figure out a way to finance the widget that you need to put in the other widget to sell, maybe there's other tools besides raising a bunch of debt, or raising sort of a line of credit, or putting it on your credit card, or you're raising a bunch of equity. You can raise term debt against your shred, so that when that tax credit comes in, it wipes out that loan, and then the company is uninhibited. Same thing with factory receivable. They're basically buying that receivable off you at a discount, and collecting it, but you have the use of that money now to scale. And again, if you're intentional about that, and you look at all the different moving parts, and if the terms and conditions make sense, then yeah, it can be a really viable option, often a lot faster than any venture, or any bank loan, venture capital, or angel money, because the asset is there. The asset is known. If you've got a history of getting shred, you get $400,000 a year in shred. You have for a couple of years. You're working with a known shred consultant that can be trusted with the quality of that asset, basically.
Right.
Because their reputation is known, and Uncle Bob might be great, and he might know shred really well, but we don't know Uncle Bob. So the asset has to be good. But if the asset's good, and you're going to get it because it's receivable from the government, and you've tracked your evidence, why should you not be able to bring that forward, especially when processing times are ballooning in terms of when you're going to get that money back? You're not getting it back as fast as you used to in terms of things like shred. There's in the budget 2025, there was a whole section on modernizing the shred program. There's been lots of discussion around that. But part of that, the onus for that is there's changes coming. There's more changes coming in shred as well. And just throwing more auditor bodies at it isn't necessarily the way to solve for those changes, especially when the shred directorate's also managing the clean economy tax credits, the $93 billion there. So it's the same here. It's 100% audit rate, so they're doing more audits. So those humans are being taken off, shred processing, and you're now introducing 4 new changes on the shred program side, one of which is historic, which is being brought back, which is capital, which is great. So any hard tech companies rejoice. Your manufacturing equipment or your testing equipment, you need an oscilloscope to do some electrical, whatever, clean room, those sorts of things. The capital cost of those sorts of things can be, but whenever they get around to actually ratifying, putting the royal assent on the budget bill, hopefully this week, because apparently they get up and don't sit for another 3 or 4 weeks. So it'd be really nice to get that bill passed, a budget in 2 years. But once that's passed, then you can claim that capital as part of your shred. You're also getting a higher cap, so you can get more refundable cash back shred for a longer period. So those are I would say not disruptive changes. The big one is going to be for the public companies, allowing public companies to get refundable shred. The argument was, why are we penalizing companies because of their source of capital if, for in a lot of cases earlier on, for clean tech companies, for example, there wasn't a private market for a lot of clean tech financing. So you end up, a number of companies end up listing on the exchange, but then they lose all that shred in terms of its refundability. So this ECPC, eligible Canadian public company definition, will allow refundable shred for certain, mostly smaller but listed public companies, which is great. But that's a big change. And so that's not going to, I suspect it is not going to speed up the processing times at CRA. And so, all of this goes into, I've got this big lumpy asset. I don't know when I'm getting that money back, but I could really use some of that now. So if I can finance that or finance another receivable, that allows you to add some elasticity in that cash flow, because when that big shock comes, and I keep going back to COVID and the chaos that created in supply chains and everything else, when a big shock comes, if you don't have that elasticity, it's a very brittle place to be.
No, that makes perfect sense. And what do you like? I think, certainly it's amazing that you've got this wealth of experience and kind of understanding of the system. What advice would you have for, let's say, a new entrepreneur that's just kind of getting into this, that sort of has heard about shred but doesn't really know how to capitalize on it. Like even sort of choosing, I mean, it seems like sometimes there's more shred advisory companies than startups at many of these events that we go to. So,
I was at SAS North, and I think there were 10 different ones, and I know them all. Some of them are my old partners, and there are. I mean, my real preference is you can talk about rates, you can talk about all those things. To me, what I look for in a shred provider is an evidence-based contemporaneous process. So somebody that is working with you on an ongoing process throughout the year, not trying to do recreationist history, dropping in shock troopers, after your December 31st year end and saying to your engineers, by the way, what did you have for breakfast January 25th? Because we want that level of granularity, but no human is wired to remember that level of granularity. Even worse, we're actually going to ask you about the meal you burnt and what went wrong with that meal and why it didn't taste good, which you're also as a human wired to forget.
I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
So I like firms that engineer for my own fallibility. I can't remember yesterday either.
Yes.
I can't. When I was practicing shred consultant at a partner at a firm, I engineered for my own shortcomings. If I can't do it, how can I expect an engineer to do it? So having a regular process, and this is so easy now with we didn't have the transcription, we didn't have. We could mine the heck out of GitHub, Jira, and everything else, but we were having monthly meetings with the engineering teams, and that still happens. But there's a lot more tools to document, certainly for software, but also hardware, even manufacturing. There's a number of these, a number of ways to do it now. There's companies like Humi that has integrated a shred practice with their HR and payroll software, because one of the parts of the evidence is what most shred is the humans that are shreddable. Now there'll be capital back in, but being able to have the timesheets basically naturally generated in that process, well, that's kind of the gold standard of evidence. You put your GitHub in and a couple of other things to triangulate those hours and sort of self-substantiate. Boy, you have an interesting ecosystem. So there's those sorts of evidence first practices. You can talk about fees, but a point here or there honestly doesn't matter. To me, it's the support that you're getting, and it's the support in an audit, which can be very adversarial, and there's definitely an expert script, and if you're not prepared for that, it's a big hit to the company. One last note on that. I had a company that was 10 years they hadn't been audited. They thought that was a stamp of approval. It is not. It just means they didn't get around to looking at you often, and just literally in the titles of the projects that they were using, and I won't say it because I don't want to give the company away. It should have been the title of the shred project. If I'd read that as an auditor, at any time in those 10 years, it would have been instant audit bait. Talking about design and front end and things that are not even remotely shreddable generally. So just things like that. You want to make sure that you're being contemporaneous, gathering the evidence, and working with folks that actually know where those fail points are.
Yes. So it's even like, so saying that, we haven't had a lot of audits, you almost want you want to be working with people who have gone through the audit process, right?
It's not the most fun process in the world, but there's actually a benefit to having been audited.
Yes.
Because it helps establish that your practices are good,
right.
That your documentation is good, and that your projects, then, which will change over time, you've got a good calibration of what those projects are to shred, because it's not necessarily intuitive where shred lands versus other things.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, Bryan. I know that you said you've got something coming up, so perhaps there's so much to talk about and so much in your rich experience and expertise that we could talk about. And I think people like you, and this is genuinely not blowing smoke, are really important and really important right now. The time is now. Isn't that a movie or something?
Yeah.
Canadian entrepreneur, and there's so many ultra talented people
Absolutely.
You know, that I think we need to make sure that we are, for want of a better word, optimizing that for Canadian entrepreneurs and talent. And there are lots of threats. There are more threats. I won't say much because I'm going to New York tomorrow. I will say this, that, you know, no matter what may come down the pipe, and there will be some stuff come down that very rusty pipe in the next 3 years, I want us to be in a position that we're resilient. And it sounds like you're optimistic that some changes are coming, but maybe we can have you back again at some point and talk about what those things are, what your wish list is.
Yep, anytime. I mean, I would love to see the patent box stuff in the shred side. There's lots of different things that we could chat about. I think getting this budget passed with the changes that are currently in there that were announced in 2024 and then re-announced in November for the 2025 budget and is still not legislated. We need that legislation done.
Yes, Prime Minister.
I just say, you know, if we're gonna move forward, we gotta move. You know, we've been able to get looks like this GST rebate legislation passed in a week. Be nice if we could get our budget passed, but because there's a lot of things in there that are holding up industries and that are preventing or people are waiting to finance SR&ED, that is, you know, the capital for SR&ED, and can't finance that and can't finance the companies because the legislation hasn't made it real yet. So we need that logjam to break, and I'm very much hoping to see that hopefully this week while they're sitting, because as I say, the House of Commons rises, and I believe isn't back till March sometime. So it'd be nice to see.
Okay. So awesome. when we start to get the warmer weather and all the snow we've had in Toronto.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Bryan and Trevor, as always. So great. And for our audience members now and the many hordes and future listeners and viewers of High Octane Friends, thank you so much. And of course, feel free to subscribe and comment. You could also, if you don't want to listen and watch all of our beautiful faces on YouTube, you can go on the other audio platforms. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day, gentlemen.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We'll speak soon.
Thanks, Bryan. Cheers.